So Renata, of the books behind you, what is your favorite? What is your number one recommendation?
Well, I recommend this one that is written by my boyfriend and was just released. So if you want to talk about startups, he has great experience launching startups and advising startups in Silicon Valley, in Puerto Rico. So that would be my recommendation. Not trying to sell anything.
That was an inadvertently perfect segue. I really like it. Welcome to our podcast. Do you have a book you've just written and would like to talk about?
He is a friend of Michigan. He didn't go to Michigan. He went to Babson. But
amazing.
In many of the events with me in Silicon Valley, when we used to go to events in person, he would go to events with me. So we're very excited about the Michigan community.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm gonna have to pick it up.
Okay, so that we have 25 people. I know that more people will join, but I also don't want to just make people wait here. So thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Renata. If you have been in any of our career events, you have seen me before. I'm part of the board of the Alumni Association of Silicon Valley, and I've been organizing career events for the past 2 years. Very glad to have you guys here. We have various types of events that we are doing online. Career is one of them. We also have more like happy hour type of events. In other areas, more in social, we used to have some of more like social engagement events that are a little bit stopped right now, but we are moving as we can. Hopefully we'll be able to have some game watch in the second part of the year. Things start opening up after the vaccine, so we'll be excited for that. And thanks, Grant, to be here. So before giving you the floor, I'd like to give the opportunity for some people to introduce themselves, talk about like why they're here today. If you also want to put your LinkedIn profile in the chat window for people to connect, so that would be great. So feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Come on, guys, don't be shy.
I'll start. I'll kick us off.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Bernardi. I'm alum of from Ross, Michigan Ross 2013. I've been working mostly with Deloitte Consulting for the past number of years since then. I'm a senior manager. I focus on helping large, complex organizations go through large, complex transformations. And very excited to hear about kind of career opportunities and switching gears and moving into kind of smaller startups, and something that I've been thinking through for a while.
Good. Thanks for joining us.
You want me to pass it off? Should I pick someone randomly?
You can.
That's not nice. Thanks for organizing this.
I could go.
I saw
Karen
Go
has
for
her
it.
hand on. Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Karen and I'm a 2016 graduate from the building right next to Ross, the School of Education with a master's in higher education. So now I'm working in the second best public university in the nation, which is UC Berkeley, at their High School of Business for as a career advisor. So happy to be here and learn more about the Silicon Valley and Bay Area industry dynamic. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for coming. And I saw that you got vaccinated. I'm jealous.
Just got my second dose today.
Oh my God. Hoping it will come.
Okay, well, I'll follow that because I just got my second dose yesterday. So, and it's not that bad so far. So, hi, everybody. I'm Jacky Horn. I'm a graduate of LSNA with a degree in political science. Separately, I have an MBA from Indiana University in marketing. I've been working in product management, communications, and marketing technology platform development over the last many years. And I'm trying to decide between one of those paths to get back into a better focus.
Thanks for joining.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Matthew Cohen. I graduated Michigan in 2019. I graduated a degree in economics and a minor in business. I currently work for Silicon Valley Bank up in San Francisco. So we work with startups all the time. Specifically, joined the enterprise software team earlier this year. So working on the early stage venture debt side of things, underwriting loans for early stage companies and venture capital firms.
I guess I'll go only because I just realized that this is in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. I'm in Chicago. My name is Ryan Sakwa. I graduated from University of Michigan Engineering in 2012. I'm actually getting an MBA at Northwestern, but I'm still going to always be loyal to the Big Blue.
We forgive you.
I work at Salesforce, which is actually based out of San Francisco. So kind of cool to see all the tech folks on the line across the country. So hope you guys are all doing well. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining. Come on, guys. Okay, so let me give my introduction. Besides being on the board, I graduated in Ross with an MBA 2011, and I work for Accenture strategy and consulting practice, really working with the tech clients in the Bay Area. Okay, now next one.
And if you prefer not to, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I graduated from College of Engineering. I did 2 masters there, industrial engineering and financial engineering. And after that, I'm in New York since then. I have had an opportunity to go to West Coast, but I didn't go. But I would like to know, whether, tech is much hotter area now than finance. So I'm interested in learning more. Thanks.
I see Jeff raise his hand too.
You're on mute.
Hi there, Jeff Lee, Ross MBA grad. How you doing? So I previously worked in fintech for a period of time. More recently, though, I've been immersed in the world of cloud computing. Find myself now kind of looking at this intersection of crypto and the cloud, and just seeing just a million possibilities out there. And saw that Grant from Coinbase was presenting, and thought I'd attend and get some insights. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Shane. I am currently a senior engineer at Baxter, a medical device manufacturer. I'm a graduate of the College of Engineering, and I kind of wanted to just hear how much tech there is, hear the intersections, and see how people have been navigating changing what they do in their workspace.
Any last one before we start?
Hello everyone, I'm Yan. I'm currently a software engineer at Lyft working on the autonomous driving car. I graduated from University of Michigan Engineering in 2017. Really nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining. Okay, guys, so if you want to continue to introduce yourself, feel free to use the chat window, put your LinkedIn if you want people to connect with you. So we're going to start now. Grant, thanks for being here with us today. So Grant, he's a VP of Talent and Learning at Coinbase. And before that, he was the head of strategy at Google X, how they used to call it. And is going to be sharing his experience today. So thank you for being here with us today.
Great to be here. And for those of you, I'm going to try and go through a bit of materials that I prepared that is a little bit of how I think about career change, both from my own lived experience and also now sitting in a position where I see a lot of people considering and debating career changes. Some of it's pretty obvious. I've never seen anyone pull it together in a consistent manner, a coherent manner. So if I can get through that quickly, hopefully there's a bunch of time for Q&A at the end where, Jeff, we can get into debates and discussions around the future of cryptocurrency and things like that as well. So I'll share my screen and let's get started. All right, first, let me give a little background about myself as well. So I grew up in Champaign-Urbana, which is where the University of Illinois is. So I had to split allegiances as well. I totally understand, Ryan. After undergrad at Harvard, went to BCG, so generalist management consulting, also graduated in economics. And I tried to redeem my soul post BCG by going to a nonprofit in Feeding America, so also based in Chicago. Loved my time there. Realized one of the things that was missing at Feeding America, we were paying 30 cents on the dollar for talent, and just we weren't attracting the right caliber of people to be able to accomplish the audacious mission that we had. There were great people there, but we struggled to find and close those great people. And so after Go Blue, going to University of Michigan, I realized I needed to find somewhere that had that audacious mission, desire for impact, but also was able to attract the talent to be able to push forward that mission. Hence Silicon Valley, hence moving out to the world of tech. So I spent 6 years at Google, half in the mothership, half at Google X, the moonshot factory. And one of the things that I realized, and I'll talk about a little bit more here, I kept trying to find smaller and smaller parts of Google, because at heart, I like to build, not maintain. At heart, I like to explore white space, not try to improve the processes that are existing today by margins. And so Coinbase happened to call and say, hey, do you want to trade off on your strategy experience, come into the fintech sector and help take on our business operations team? So that was where I started within Coinbase. One of the fun things about startups, though, I'll get into again a little bit more, is you have the opportunity to explore more parts of the business. Your hats can change a little bit more quickly than in other environments. And so was working on a project with our head of talent acquisition, and she said, hey, I'm going on sabbatical. Can you look after the team while I'm gone? And I said, yeah. And she happened to not come back to Coinbase from that sabbatical. So I became the interim head of talent acquisition, and actually decided after a few months of that, I wanted to make a more full-time pivot into the people space, into the talent acquisition space, because who you hire and how you hire well in a hyper-growth startup is actually a relatively important challenge for us to solve and get right. So that's where I am today, working on talent and people-related problems here at Coinbase. So why am I uniquely suited to talk about things like career change? The meandering path on the previous slide, where every 2 to 3 years I go through a relatively stark career change. So a bit of lived experience, but also I think my role today, right? I oversee talent and learning. And what that means is, from the talent perspective, we think a lot about how do we hire great people for the role, both who and how we assess that talent. And from a learning perspective, we think very, very heavily on how do we grow those people? How do we retain them? How do we give them exciting career paths so that they come in and they aren't just feeling like widgets in a machine shop? They aren't just coming in and feeling like they have one role, and in order to advance or in order to change their scope and purview, they need to leave. And so that is fundamentally the challenge that I am taking on here, or have taken on at Coinbase, is thinking through both of these sides of the problem. From the very minute someone thinks that they might want to join Coinbase all the way to the end of their tenure in one role at Coinbase, how do we make sure that we find continuously the challenges that they are going to want to take on next and help them navigate that career change into Coinbase and through Coinbase? All right, so now let's get into a couple spectrums that I really want to talk about, because they're pieces of a decision that I've had to make previously. And so treat this is not a binary. You don't have to join 2 people in a garage or a large multinational conglomerate. This is a spectrum. You can go somewhere in the middle, but I'm going to talk about the ends of the spectrum, because that's where the differences are the most stark here. So if you're currently in Deloitte, as an example, hi Dave, and you're evaluating what is great about going into a much smaller company, versus what you might have today in that environment, there's a couple trade-offs that you might want to consider. So in the entrepreneurial environment, in the startup, in the smaller company you join, you're going to have much greater impact personally on the organization. You're going to have probably a higher variety, as I am living proof of, in terms of the types of experiences that you're going to have and the number of hats that you might get to wear. And you're probably going to have a lot more white space to design in. Your more of your work is going to be focused on building, creation, innovation versus in a larger company. Now, there's some significant downsides that come with that as well. There's not a lot of structure and stability. Well, oftentimes what you're doing is building that structure and stability for future generations at the company. There are very rarely sort of formal development programs the earlier you get in companies. So that growth path is a bit more self-created than built out for you. And resources, this is everything from like the in-office perks to the pay to the company coffers that let you invest in things like tools, technology, and expensive coworkers to help you do your job. And so just be aware at that end of the spectrum, you're trading off one for the other. It's almost the flip side of the coin if you think about going to the Google or Deloitte, large multinational type organization, right? You got resources in spades. You're not short on that. You have that structure and stability. So there probably are processes for how to make processes in these types of organizations. And there are very formal programs often for how you come in, how you onboard, how you train into your role, how you develop in that role, and how you can grow throughout the company. There often, however, the trade-off of that side is more bureaucracy, more process, more hoops to jump through if you want to try to get anything done. Additionally, the focus on maintenance is often outweighing the focus of innovation. So one of the examples I use from Google is when I was at X, even a lot of the projects that we were looking at were evaluated through the lens of, would this put our cash cow of the advertising business or the search business at risk? And so the innovation was restricted by what might be acceptable or feasible in an environment like that. And frankly, this widget mentality as well is something that I spoke to earlier, where you feel like you're a part of a machine. And if you were to leave, then they would just find another widget to place in it, not necessarily a unique individual who's making a great stamp on that organization. So this is, as you're thinking through it, the spectrum on size of company to join. Let me add another axis though. So we're now in a world where there is a trade-off you can make in joining a company. Hopefully, we get back to having traditional in-office work very soon. I'm glad that everyone on this call is talking about getting vaccinated. But more and more companies are moving to what they call like a remote posture. Coinbase, as an example, has shifted to what we call remote first, meaning we will have and maintain office presence, but we may never require a person to come into one of those offices. And so thinking about the trade-offs therein, from that in-office perspective, right? There are some great things to being in an office. I miss the socialization with my colleagues. I miss walking to a kitchen and getting a cup of coffee that's just sitting waiting there and not having to make my own. I miss having that dedicated workspace where my 2-year-old isn't running around in the background and distracting me from the things I might be trying to accomplish. But in order to get there, you have to commute. You lose some of that flexibility to sort of do things in the middle of the day or be around your house. And it's very location specific. So if I want to work in a company that has an office in a particular location, I have to live close to that location or risk a much longer commute. Now, similarly, there are trade-offs from a remote perspective. So it is a very location agnostic way to work. You can go do it from anywhere. Well, within the employment limitations of the company that you join, you don't have that commute perspective. Well, my commute is 30 seconds walking down from my bedroom into my office and hopefully grabbing like toast on the way. And you gain a lot of that flexibility, but you trade off things like increased sense of isolation. You trade off things like an inability to separate work and life quite as neatly, knowing that that office is sitting 30 feet away at most from wherever you are at home. And frankly, one of the other things that we're combating here at Coinbase is cross-functional visibility, or think of it like the casual collisions phenomenon. You very rarely have the opportunity to do those run-ins or meet and greets that you just happen to have with a colleague where you throw the problem out that you're facing to them and they toss back a great idea. And so you feel more siloed in an environment that's remote, and you often have to create those opportunities to break down silos or to reduce those silos. And so what I love doing as an ex-consultant when I have 2 axes is making a 2x2. So again, this is not a binary spectrum here, but just imagine that there are people who are going to be more entrepreneurial and want a more traditional in-office setting, right? You probably care most about the team environment, building very close relationships with that small group and building things amazing together, right? Now, if you're going the more large multinational route, traditional in-office, that's often the kind of stability type role or stability oriented role where you really like that structure, you really like the ability to get away and treat that work as that second space. Now thinking about remote. Working at a startup now in remote, and frankly, one of the things that has attracted me to and kept me at Coinbase is the variety of the things that I get to do, right? There's a lot of flexibility in the role that I have and a lot of flexibility in the way that I conduct my work. And that's something that frankly, where I'm at least in sort of stage of my life, is incredibly valuable to me. Now, more companies are moving this way. This might be a null set to some extent, but that working for a large multinational, but also remotely, probably is someone who orients more towards work-life balance. So given that structure, stability, a little bit more contained workspace, while being remote, you probably are optimizing for that flexibility or that ability to, keep as much of your life as you need from work. Okay, I'm going to introduce 2 more axes, and then I promise I'm going to be done with all the axes here. The other thing that I often get asked about is, hey, I'm here. I'm in function A in industry X, and I really, really, really want to get to function B in industry Y. So I'm in biz ops, in management consulting, and I want to get to product management in tech. I'm in finance in CPG, and I really want to get to strategy in a non-retail function in a bank, right? So how do we do that? Oftentimes, and a lot of the times I saw this both at business school and right after business school, people tried to make that leap directly. I tried to say, all right, I have function A and industry X experience, but let me go apply to a bunch of jobs in function B and industry Y. It's really hard to do that. It's not impossible, but it is a very difficult leap to make. And so what I often recommend is pick an axis to jump up and then jump over. And so as an example, if you're going to think about how you change your function first, then you can move to a different function within that same industry. It becomes much easier to make that hop over to that different function within the same industry. Or differently, there's a totally different path to do that, but same end state is change the industry first, and then try to change the function or the role that you're in within that industry. And I say industry, but it's usually easier to do that within a company because you're a known entity than it is to do it switching companies within the same industry. Again, not impossible, but as when you're a known entity, when you have the relationships and rapport, it's much easier to make that kind of transition. So real life example, I was in a strategy role in a nonprofit. I ended up in a people role in tech. I did that by getting hired into tech and trading off on my strategy background. So completely changing the industry because I knew I wanted to be in tech. And then since I've been here, I've changed function into the people space. So it would have been nigh impossible for me to, from my background, working in Feeding America, to say, hey, Coinbase, would you hire me to run your talent function? Probably would have been laughed out of the door, if not immediately rejected by the algorithms that we have. So one quick aside on people roles before I talk one through one final heuristic and then open it up to questions. One of the biggest questions that I get is, why did you jump from a business role into a people role, right? It feels like at best a detour in a career, and at worst potentially a step back to go into what is considered traditionally sometimes a more back office function like human resources. I specifically call it people and not human resources because I think the connotation does imply some sort of legacy environment to it. But I didn't have a great answer to that question for a while, other than I felt passionate about it. I felt like I could make a difference in it, and I was enjoying the role. And so I put some thought into it, and I realized, all right, here's what I was doing when I was thinking in a business context. So the key elements that I learned, or the key things that I learned how to do, were breaking down complex problems, data analytics, presentation skills, how to do a really polished presentation to executives, driving alignment to get to an answer, and figuring out how we spin up in a very, very quick and efficient manner the execution against that recommendation once we're all aligned. So it's that generalist toolkit of, call it problem solving, alignment, and longer term strategic thinking. And as I was thinking through, what do we do in the people function that I sit in now? A lot of that is, how do we identify, hire, integrate the top talent that we really want, that we need to accomplish our mission, and do it effectively, regardless of where that top person sits, internal to the company, external to the company, location agnostic. How do I manage a team of great people? How do I keep them motivated? How do I reward them? How do I grow them? How do I lean into the development throughout their careers? Things like engagement, fostering belonging and inclusion. There's a lot that goes into making sure that teams feel like they can get that work done. And lastly, there's some process and administration of these programs that gets more complex as you scale. And that's a really interesting element of trying to run these programs as well. And then I realized any executive in any seat in the world is going to need to know how to do both of these. This is not like, don't treat this as me-see here, but the experiences that I have lived are going to be valuable regardless of where I take them. And so one of the things that I always urge people is, if HR is not, a backwater of the company, it actually has the potential to be a vanguard. If you think strategically about how you invest in people, then you're actually going to be far ahead of the curve versus other companies. And frankly, you're going to be far ahead in your career because the skill set that you bring might be less obvious to the folks who are in those roles today, and will certainly, the skills you gain, be important in any role that you take on in a leadership function. And I think actually the people function is moving this way. I think there's a lot more strategy, analytics, and business involved inherent in people functions today than there was a couple decades ago. And there certainly will be more in a decade or two than there is today. Last slide, I promise. Last thing, anyone who's thinking through career change, I tend to give my very, very dumb guy straw man heuristic for how I evaluate roles. The first thing I look at is impact. By the way, these are my three. Your three are going to be totally different. It's totally fine, but come up with what your questions are and make sure that you're evaluating those roles against them so that you're being true to what you actually want to do next and not falling prey to sexy company, sexy title, really great recruiter on my team that happens to convince you that you really want to join this company. So first is I look at impact. This is particularly important to me, as I mentioned, with my background varying from nonprofit over into impactful companies and roles within the tech sector. And there's really two sub-questions to this, right? It is not just the impact of what I'm joining, though I want the company I'm joining to have impact on the world, but I also want my role and where I sit in the company to be uniquely impactful on the organization itself. So it's kind of a two-tiered question that I ask there. The second is team. This one's probably a bit more universal, but at the end of the day, am I going to work with people who I'm going to learn from and who get shit done, to put it bluntly? And secondly, am I going to enjoy working with them? Because I think both of those elements need to be in place for you to have a workplace that you're actually feeling like you're thriving in. And lastly, from a growth perspective, am I going to develop in a way that I want to professionally? So is this going to give me opportunities for professional growth and advancement? And is it going to give me opportunities to develop in personal ways that I might want to, like becoming a more empathetic leader, having a better understanding of what it means to foster belonging in a group, regardless of where that is. And so with that, I don't know, questions. I want to open it up because this is very generic and I'd love to hear what people are thinking as they're navigating their career changes.
Grant,
Yes,
the second point,
the
second point that you made about evaluating the team and the people, in my experience, it's one of the hardest things to do on the outside. And there's certainly, you want to do as much due diligence as you can, but you're also, recruiting into the company. So it can just be tough. I'm just wondering, like, how have you approached that in the past? Really get to know, it's like, how are people going to be when the going gets tough, how, like how much mentorship am I going to get, or, what's the collaboration going to look like? How have you thought about that?
A relatively standard practice in most recruiting is to do a reference call on a candidate, right? Where you say, hey, candidate, can we speak with your former manager so that they tell us how it was to work with you? And they can validate some of the things that we see from this process. I highly, highly encourage people, and frankly, it's a good sign when people do reference checks on us, or reference checks on the team that you're joining, reference checks on the manager. And it can be a bit awkward of a conversation if you say to your future manager, hey, can I speak with someone on the team about what it's like to work with you? But if they say no, that's a pretty stark and glaring red flag.
Yeah.
And if you are uncomfortable being that direct, LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool where you can find people who have worked in the company and worked in that function, and reach out to them and tell them that you're evaluating joining a team or a role, and that you'd love their advice and counsel on their experience working in that function.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What else is on people's minds? Or has anyone else done that successfully, where you've evaluated a team and felt like you've gotten good signal outside of the interview process?
One thing that I'm doing right now is what you mentioned. Secondly, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and I'm going to say that the Michigan community is very helpful. So usually what I do is I filter people who are working at the company, who went to the University of Michigan, try to find something else in common, and then I mail them. Like I use a LinkedIn mail message and ask them, like, can you share your story at the company and how you like the culture and things like that. Things that the team who is trying to hire me will not tell me. And I have had like very good response, especially when you have things in common with people, especially like I definitely use the University of Michigan connection. Sometimes you can also use the connection through your company. So someone from, for example, if I'm trying to move from consulting to tech, I can look for people who also worked at my same company and they did the same type of move, and I can ask them how things are working. So I usually do that, and I think it's a good move.
I saw Julia typed in a question as well that it is similar, but there's a nuance to it. So what's the best way to assess the team or corporate culture during the interview process? So I think my advice was far more around team or manager a second ago. Corporate culture, you can also get through, call it reference calls, but at the end of the day, you should be thinking about the interview process as much about convincing them that you are the right fit for the role as understanding whether or not they are the right fit for you to join next. And so if they don't give an opportunity for you to ask questions or for you to explore things like, tell me a little bit more about the corporate culture, try to get them to carve space out for that. So when you get to the end of a process and they want to make you an offer and have you join a company, it is entirely acceptable to say, hey, I really appreciate it. I don't feel like I had the time to get my questions answered fully during this process. It'd be great to speak to someone on the team about A, B, or C, just to try and get a better sense of it. And guarantee you that if they have decided they want to hire you, they will certainly make that opportunity and space for you to be able to engage with the team and engage with the organization at a bit deeper level. Jane had a question in here as well. Said, do you think you could be where you are without the large company experience at BCG? What are the thoughts for new grads to join startups directly out of college versus traditionally large companies first? It is a phenomenal question. I think BCG was a very good couple of years from a training perspective and a very mediocre couple of years from a career perspective for me. And I do think that going into a traditional training ground like consulting, banking, rotational programs makes sense for folks who may not know what their ideal career path is. So using myself as an example, I studied economics. There's like 3 paid economists in the world. So there's no way I was going into that as a career, but I had no idea what to do otherwise. And so going into consulting did give me the ability to look at a variety of roles in a variety of industries and learn a lot about how to be a professional at the same time. If you know what you want, if you know exactly where you want to end up, or at least have high fidelity in that, then you probably don't need that way stop. Secondly, so I think that addresses the first question, hopefully, about like large company experience. Do you need that? Helpful, but not necessary. The second is, what about joining a startup directly out of college versus traditionally large companies first? This is another interesting point, right? So I think startups inherently are higher risk, right? They lack that stability, they lack that resource. So you could join a startup that ends up doing phenomenally well. And if you do, you probably will have accelerated growth trajectory of your career versus someone who joined a traditional large company first. Meaning, because you joined while they were small and they experienced rapid growth, you end up taking on outsized projects, probably managing teams, probably leading functions before you would otherwise in climbing a more traditional corporate ladder. But there's an equal, if not greater, chance that that startup doesn't have that massive outsized success, and that what you have to point to on your resume is I did a bunch of things wearing a bunch of various hats at this startup, and I'm now trying to sell myself to you, other startup or large company, that experience is relevant for what I would be doing in your organization. So understand the beta is different. And if it is a startup that you are sufficiently passionate about and you default to things like caring about team, caring about variety, caring about the impact that you're going to have on that organization, then it's totally acceptable and totally fine. It's just a call it risk reward trade-off that you'd be making.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Grant, understanding that the world is changing faster than ever, business is changing faster than ever, all of these trends, how have you thought about, or how would you counsel the folks on this call to think about time horizon when thinking about a career change or a pivot?
I think it's a really good question. And my rough heuristic for that was, hey, I know generally where I want to be in, call it a 10-year time frame, right? That said, I might not know exactly what the steps are to get there. So think of your career in 2 to 3 year chunks, because you're probably not going to be, even if you stay at a company for many years, you're not going to be in the same role for more than that period of time. You're going to advance, you're going to pivot, you're going to take on additional responsibilities. And so if that next role gets you to 30 degrees of that North Star where you might want to end up, and it has a even non-linear path, but somewhat reasonable expectation that you could then pick up additional skills that get you towards that North Star, it's probably an acceptable role to take. So I think both thinking through that longer time frame of where might I want to end up. It doesn't have to be, I want to be CEO of a 500-person startup that's focused on medical devices. It doesn't have to be that specific. It can be a little bit more, I think I want to be in an executive team in a company that's focused on med tech. And start thinking through what the steps are to get yourself and position yourself in that on that 2 to 3 year time horizon.
Cool.
Jeff, I saw you raise your hand. Are we getting into crypto now?
Close. Good question, Grant. So looking at your 2x2, where do you see Coinbase plotted on that map? And how do you see that changing over time, both from the perspective of the company and from your own?
Ooh, I really like that question. Let me see if I can go back to the 2x2, because I'll probably track changes on that over time. Okay, we probably started at very traditional in office and pretty close to the left end of the spectrum in entrepreneur and startup. Give you a little window into my world. Coming from Google, I wasn't ready to go to the 2-person in a garage type startup. So Coinbase was 400, not fully on the left, but definitely Series D startup, no necessarily like path to going public, et cetera. And so where we probably are today is closer to the middle of the size axis, and probably all the way at the opposite end of the location axis, where we've moved from being a traditional in-office company to we are now a company that has said we are remote first. Even if you go sit in an office, we're probably going to make you dial into meetings on a computer so that we're making the lived experience equal for people regardless of where they are. And I think 60+% of people that we've hired are not even in locations recently, are not even in locations where we have an office. And so that pivot has actually opened up a massive pool of talent that we wouldn't have had access to otherwise, right? Hiring traditionally in San Francisco Bay Area, a little bit in New York, a little bit in Portland, and a couple other very countries that we had small offices in. So we now have access to all of North America, larger swaths of EMEA. We're opening up presence across APAC, and it's been night and day in terms of what we see the talent pool that we are both attracting and able to attract, as well as how we compete against other companies who are trying to attract talent.
Very cool. And as time goes on, where do you see kind of your needs, your personal needs going on this map?
That's a great question. So as someone with a 2-year-old, work-life balance is starting to get more and more important for me. And I'd say the good news is Coinbase, we're never going to be great at work-life balance until we are much, much larger than we are today. But we're moving in the direction where probably the hyper growth demands when I first joined, we've actually got the resources and staffing to build out some of that. So we're shifting to a model where we have fewer single points of failure, where we have fewer requirements for people to be in sort of an always on mentality. And I think that's actually a functional prerequisite to doing remote well, because if you're remote and a 24/7 culture, you're going to burn people out incredibly quickly.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Good question. Really good question. David. Oh yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I was just saying that's really interesting because when you think about I'm going to speak from personal experience, but I know that, you know, I mean, like the management consulting roles and businesses out there, right, that tend to not have fantastic work-life balance. Sounds like from your experience, it's going to be a similar situation. The further along the spectrum you move towards the entrepreneurial startup opportunities, just based on the fact that, right, like you're wearing multiple hats, you are responsible for more. It's kind of like that sweet spot in the middle, maybe where Coinbase is headed, that you find the best opportunities to create work-life balance.
I think that's true. I think there's also an element. Your mileage may vary. None of this is universal. It's directional. One of the startups that I was also considering at the time I moved to Coinbase was run by a couple former entrepreneurs who had built and exited a successful company previously. And so they said, we're doing it our second time. We're way more oriented to work-life balance this time, because we know what it's like to put in 16 to 18-hour days. And frankly, we have kids now. We want to do this in a way that's a bit more sustainable for us and our employees. So you'll find exceptions to the rule wherever you want to look. So I think it's to your earlier question around how do you understand what it's like to work on that team or with that manager. That's another good thing you can explore to see if the rules are true or if they might be exceptions. David put in a question that says, you spoke about industry and role change process. How about other biases such as ageism and job hopping? I think I know how to answer this, David, but can I get you to provide a little bit more context on the question?
Yeah, no, I just when you're trying to make a change, you know, there's oh, you're not in this industry, so you want to, you know, I'm in manufacturing and I want to go into, you know, finance or banking. You know, you're not from that experience, even though the function may, you know, people have that bias for it, or you want to, you know, you want to go from you know, manufacturing to HR, you know, that overcoming. But there's other things as well that kind of can be barriers to that, such as ageism, or you've tried a bunch of different things and you chop around. They look at that from the resume perspective. You know, it could be other types of bias as well that people have in the hiring process that you have to overcome. And I was just wondering if you saw it any differently for other things besides industry and role?
There's so many ways that I can go with this, but it is such a good call out that A, this is not universal. B, it's still hard to change function or change industry, even while staying within the same industry or function. The easiest job to get is the same job you have in a very similar company, right? That's the easiest job to apply for and get. And so I think there are barriers that get put into place otherwise. And frankly, the bias in recruiting often comes about when you're trying to apply low fidelity filters to get signal as quickly as possible. And so one example of that is, hey, I tossed in my resume. I'll use myself as an example. If I were trying to apply to the head of talent job at Coinbase from running strategy at Google X, I would have applied. I would have put my job or my resume in that application process. They would have taken one look at it and said, doesn't have experience in talent, ignore. And so those filters exist for a reason. And they typically exist because it is a easy way to take what is often a large pile of interested candidates in a role and turn it into a small pile of potentially highly qualified candidates for that role. That's literally the only thing a recruiting function is doing at the very top of the funnel is saying, we've got 1,000, I need to find the top 10 out of it. And so they apply these low fidelity filters because they're more worried about the false positives at that point that might get through than they are about the false negatives. So they're less worried about filtering out people who might be qualified and more worried about filtering in people who they are sure are qualified. So a couple ways to get over that if you are worried about either getting filtered out for not being in that right functional role or getting filtered out for another bias. And there are plenty of them. It can be you didn't go to the right colleges. It can be you didn't have the right companies on your resume. It can be you, like to your point, hopped jobs too quickly. The best way to overcome some of that is to talk to people in the company. If you have a connection within the company, ideally a personal connection that you can get to know and use as your proxy to represent you and your skill set in the company, that referral is probably the best way to avoid getting caught in that very coarse filter at the top of the funnel. If you can't do that, if you don't have a friend who works in that company who knows your skill set and is willing to take a stand for you in a role that you might be a non-obvious fit for, then the second best thing is networking and trying to build those connections up over time so that you're able to build that rapport and demonstrate that that success or demonstrate that capability. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. There's, like you said, there's lots of them, and there's lots of reasons to get through that process, and particularly, like you said, when you're making a change, it's difficult if you're not the easy fit. So you have to get through the recruiter to get to the people, and finding the people often is difficult, or they have certain filters that each person may have a different set of filters, and trying to get through that process. So thank you.
Oh, totally. I think you have my empathy, because it is not easy. And the clearer that you can tell the story to anyone who you chat with about it, the easier they're going to be able to represent that story to someone else. So my background probably doesn't make any sense. But if I can tell a through line as to how the experiences that I have together make me valuable, uniquely suited to the position that I'm in today, then it's going to be easier for the recruiter to tell that to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager to tell that to the hiring team and potential committee. And so that storytelling almost becomes a part of your both networking and sales pitch of yourself to the company. I see Vera has a hand raised.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for taking time to speak with us. This is Vera. Well, I'm quite intrigued by one of the earlier points you brought up about having a 10-year goal and then breaking it down to like 2 to 3 year, like more reachable targets. I think theoretically it definitely makes sense. Would love to see if you have any pointers on how to best go about identify that 10-year goal, and if you mind sharing your own experience in finding a 10-year goal and then breaking it to like 2 to 3 year chunks, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. There are a million books out there that are very oriented to trying to help you do this. I think the favorite one that I have found is Designing Your Life, written by some Stanford D School professors, and it asks you to go through a number of sort of thought experiments to gauge what you're doing today, what you like about what you're doing, what you might not like about it, explore a potential universe of alternate paths. I think it asks you to pick 3 and kind of write out what your career or life might look like in each of those scenarios 10-ish years out, and then evaluate those against what you value and care about in both work and in life. And so those are probably the right steps. Having a book or a guide to doing that is probably one of the better ways to force yourself to go through it in a linear and structured manner and actually complete it. And frankly, doing it yourself is harder than doing it with a group of people who might also be in a similar position and might know you and be able to call you on your BS when you're like, of course I want to be a pastry chef in France. And they're like, but hey, you suck at baking, so maybe you don't want to do that. And so highly recommend the way that I did it, at least, was pulled together basically a book club of a few friends who were walking through this book and walking through this exercise together.
Oh, this is great. Thank you for the advice.
Absolutely. I see another question from Yao in here on following up on Jane's question for new grads. If you're in a startup, what are ways to explore what functions or industries you might enjoy doing? And also to understand if the function you're currently working on is quality versus knowing it is at a big company. Yeah, I think I understand the first part of your question around how do you, if you're in a startup where you're wearing many hats and probably not deeply ingrained in any particular function, how do you think about exploring other functions or industries? Can you give me a little bit more information on the second half of that question?
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry, my video is a bit off today. Yeah, I guess like it's like a question more so for I think you see it more in startups sometimes, like work you do is a bit unstructured and a bit like lean, you know, for like whether what you're doing like is the best way to go about it, or whether there's like, I feel like if you're in a structured team of like more tenured engineers or like with a bigger company with better processes, you would know exactly that, okay, you see these people doing it, these jobs or like these tasks at a higher rate. So it's like what, if that makes sense.
Yep. I mean, okay, I totally understand what you're trying to ask now, and I think it is a very good question. All right, the first half of that question: how do you explore other functions and industries you might enjoy doing? The good news at a startup is you probably do it by doing. Right? You probably raise your hand for a project that is in a different function or of or related to a slightly different team than you might be currently supporting, and often that flexibility exists. Again, your mileage will vary, but often that flexibility exists to sort of explore live internally, in particular for other functions. Industries is a bit harder. I highly recommend networking for that. Just talk to people who are in those industries, ask them about what their role is like, how they feel about the work that they're doing, and try to get a good sense. There was a time in my life when I really thought I was going to be an athletic director at a Power 5 conference university. And then I talked to a bunch of people who were athletic directors or assistant athletic directors or associate ADs, and their lives were very different than the one that I saw myself leading, where they were, had to move a family to Manhattan, Kansas, because Kansas State had the best, associate assistant to the athletic director job open, and had to pick up and move their entire family to the middle of nowhere in Kansas and then start sweeping popcorn on the floors there. And so that, by not getting that lived experience, it's easier to talk to people who have that lived experience and who've been further down the road. As is evident from this conversation, people love talking about themselves. So sorry about that. But if you approach a conversation by saying, you're in a role or you're in a position that I think is really exciting or could be really exciting for me, I would love to learn how you got there and what you think about it and any advice and counsel you have for someone who's considering following a similar path. That's like gold to some. They're like, oh my gosh, my wisdom and experience will be valuable for someone else. Let me share it. And so those conversations then will reveal the nuggets as to whether or not it is a path you want to go down. The second half of that question around how do you know if the function you're currently working on is high fidelity is doing the things in the right ways versus what might exist in the rest of the world. We often encounter that problem at Coinbase, and what we tend to do is just go benchmark. We talk to our peers who are facing similar challenges at other companies or who have faced those challenges and tried to solve them at other organizations and ask them, what did you do? Most of the information that you will get is not proprietary. It's people who are very willing to share lived experiences around how they might have solved a tough sort of process or technical challenge. And often you'll skip ahead months or years by understanding what they tried, what pitfalls they encountered, and help you and your team avoid those as well. I don't have any great advice other than benchmarking, or call it like research in whether it be sort of desk-based web research or using consultants or like GLG style. So I guess it would be like call a bunch of people who are experts in the space, like expert calls that give you that kind of information.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thanks.
Absolutely. With that, I will give you your lives on a Friday back. Thank you so much for all the questions, for listening to me talk about random things. And Renata, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming to our event. I think it was great. I always learn a lot on those events, so it's great to get to talk to people that I don't have contact all the time, but went to business school around the same time, and get to know what you're doing and all this great advice. So thank you. That was very insightful. I'm going to think about that 2 by 2 in my life right now and what I want to do next. So thank you. And thank you everybody for taking time on your Friday. Some of you it's your lunchtime, some of you is more like later in your day. So thank you for all being here.
Thanks everyone. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
You.
Yeah.